And now, our speaker. Brittany Stringfellow-Otey is a professor of law at Pepperdine University. She directs the university's legal aid clinic, which provides legal services to clients living on Skid Row in Los Angeles, many of whom are homeless. The clinic operates in downtown LA in the Union Rescue Mission, one of the largest homeless shelters in Los Angeles. But before her legal career, Brittany sat where you're sitting. She's a 1997 graduate of Westmont. She lived in Page her freshman year. She returned to Page her junior year as an RA. She was a double major in English and philosophy. She went on Potter's Clay and served 1 year as the producer of Spring Sing. Those are pretty impressive credentials, Brittany. We are so happy to have you with us, and we look forward to hearing what you have to share with us. Will you please join me in welcoming Brittany Stringfellow-Otey.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm really grateful to the Provost's office for setting this up, not only just to bring me back to campus, because who doesn't want to go back to Santa Barbara, to the cool breeze, which, by the way, is missing. It is so hot here. I am not used to this. It's so wonderful to be back, but also I'm just so grateful for the space to talk about a topic that has become really important to me over the course of my life. When I was asked to do this and I was trying to figure out what I might do, my husband's like, you realize you can talk about this for 3 hours with no prep. Like, you talk about this all the time. So this is something that has grown to be really important to me. I'm really grateful for my place that I work. I'm grateful to have my little law office on Skid Row. It's a really unique setting. It's not where most people hope to end up at the end of law school or any time in their life, really. Right now, it's kind of a particularly dark season on Skid Row. There are over 6,000 people living on the streets in just a very small several square blocks. And the city council just this week declared a state of emergency and is going to try to put $100 million into the problem because it has reached absolute chaos. There are encampments all along the street. There are people living in shelters, but there are probably just as many living outside of the shelters. And it really feels a little bit like anarchy. And if I'm really honest with you, there are days that it's really hard to go to work. I'm a crier, just so you know. I'll just give you fair notice. It's hard for me to go there sometimes. And yet I feel really called to it, and that's been a journey that I want to kind of talk to you about this morning. The flip side of working somewhere that is dark and sad and dirty is that my students and my Pepperdine students come down and work with me in this clinic, and we have a front row seat to redemption. You cannot convince me that anybody is beyond hope. You cannot convince me that anybody is beyond repair. I have such a deep and abiding belief that God is a God of redemption. And so while it is hard to be there, the flip side of it is so amazingly rich. I spent just yesterday a few moments with a client that I've actually had for 10 years. That's kind of how it goes at a legal aid clinic. And when I first met him, he had just gotten out of a very long stint of prison. And I'm always a little hesitant to find out why they went to prison if they were in prison for 20 years. That's a big deal, right? And so when I finally did see his rap sheet, there was every reason to be afraid, and I was afraid of him. And I would say over the past 10 years, it has been such a joy and an honor to watch him as he has submitted his life to Christ and pursued a completely different kind of life. I can't believe I got to watch it. He's now married, he's now employed, and get this, he stopped by so that we could talk about how he might do his job with more integrity. I was like, can you even fathom this? Because he can also tell you, yeah, it's amazing. It's amazing. Because in a former life, he could tell you how to get in someone's home really easily, right? I mean, it's just the switch. And what the kingdom does to a person just absolutely blows my mind. So in preparation for today, I wanted to try to get back into my 18-year-old mind and figure out what I was thinking about when I was sitting here, possibly like memorizing a sonnet between my knees from my English class after chapel. What was I thinking about, especially when it comes to this idea of calling and vocation? I see Dr. Willis right here, and I'm like, maybe for you. And so what I did, and it is a true miracle that I could find them, I found my college journals. There are about 6 of these because I'm a processor. I'm a verbal processor, but apparently no one was listening to me, so I wrote it all out. These, by the way, are to be burned upon my death. I've made a deal with my husband because they are mortifying. But in this book in particular, there are exactly 3 times that I wrote about calling and vocation. There are exactly 9 million times that I wrote about, why am I not dating anybody? What is going on with my roommate? How does this work? All the big questions of life, but very little about that next step, I would say, which I don't know is uncommon. And there's one particular entry that I just have to humiliate myself with, because I feel like if I really believe Brene Brown, vulnerability is the thing, right? So here's what I'm going to say. Is law school my dream? Is motherhood my dream? What does it matter if I don't get a date soon? So that in 1994, that's where I was. I don't know how the ratios are going now, but they were not in my favor in 1994. And yeah, okay, so we'll get to that. I am so grateful for my Westmont years. One thing, I met my 3 best friends here. 3 women, one of which, Taylor's here with me today, which is so awesome. We're spread out through the country, but next month we're going on a trip to Chicago together, and we have lived through this question and many questions and many seasons together over the past 20 years, and I'm so grateful for that. The other thing I'm so grateful for is that this is the place where I believe I found my voice. I cannot tell you the impact that I now see retrospectively of the faculty and the staff and the administrators who took really deep interest in me. They cared about where I was going to land. And if I could say one thing to you, would you please use those office hours? There are incredible people here who, quite frankly, there is not another season of your life where people are going to be this interested in your development. It just doesn't happen. And so I am so grateful for that particular season. I can remember, Dr. Mullen is no longer here, but she was my history professor, and really influential, particularly to a lot of women growing up here. We all did grow up here. And I remember her saying to me, "Tell me more about that, Brittany." And I thought, oh, it took everything in me to say what I did say, and now you're asking me a follow-up question? Like, I think I might die. But that kind of discourse and that kind of investment from my resident director, from deans, from the president, from professors, it really made an impact on me. And as I was learning to find my voice, which I clearly have found, right? As I was finding my voice, I started to have just these little murmurings. Not anything particularly clear, not any kind of job course, anything like that, but just little murmurings where I wondered if my voice might someday be used to amplify the voice of others. I didn't know what that looked like, I didn't know what that would be, but I just kept thinking of that. And so I started to do things that sort of fed that. And they were very random, and I mean, there was no rhythm or reason to them, but things like I really loved when a chapel speaker had to tell something about maybe work in the inner city. And so I would follow them and find them in the DC afterward, and I didn't have any specific questions, I just kind of wanted to be near them. I've joined the multicultural student group that started while I was here, just so I could hear stories about what it was like to not be like me. I would go to lectures at UCSB, just periodically, and again, just sort of feeding this murmuring that was happening inside me. When it came to graduation, I still didn't quite know what all this would look like. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I either wanted to be a party planner or a lawyer. So, these are good things to work out. So I did one of the most fun things I've done in my life, and I moved to DC with my best friend, and I planned parties for members of Congress, which sounds way cooler than it is. It was so boring and mundane, but the time in DC was incredible. There were a lot of alums living out there. We all lived kind of within a square mile of each other. I was throwing parties, so I would bring all the fancy food that was left over, and on Thursday nights we'd eat, like food we couldn't afford and watch Friends, because that's how old I am. So we would just have such a fun time. I think we went salsa dancing every Thursday night for like 6 months straight. It was so fun. And all during these murmurings are still occurring. Like, I realize, okay, party planning's not it, but something is still happening inside of me at this point. And so again, I'm doing things that I can't really define. I tried tutoring in the inner city, not supposed to be an elementary school teacher, it was very clear, but I just liked being in that setting. I used to find myself just taking the metro to just parts of the city that I wasn't familiar with and just sort of watching. I now notice that this is a little voyeuristic and maybe like a stalker, but I really was just trying to get a sense of these other communities that I might somehow serve. Parker Palmer has this great book called Let Your Life Speak. And on one hand, the topic of this book is living a life that says what you want to say into the world, right? Like, what is it that you want to give? But the flip side of it is listening to our lives, listening to what's moving us, what has happened to us, our joy, our pain, all of these types of things, and asking, what might that speak into what I am to do? He says, before I can tell my life what I want to do with it, I must listen to my life telling me who I am. And so the first thing that I would say about this journey of finding my vocation and calling, finding my particular way of loving God and others with who I am, is listening. I began to start seeing connections of things in my life that sort of were leading to this, but when they happened, there was no way to know. I thought back to when I was a kid, and at summer camp, I was bullied by a group of kids that had lived in our local projects. And I was so mad. I was like indignant about it. And so I came home and told my parents, and I was like, you need to find a way to get them kicked out of our church, because I'm awesome. And they wonderfully said, absolutely not. They deserve to be there, possibly more than you do. I was so mad, so mad at my parents, and I held that against them for a while. But in retrospect, I start to see that the adult part of me wanted to find a way to serve those kids, to understand their story better. I've seen all of these little things throughout my life, and I've seen it in my friends, whether it's joy or crisis or tragedy, whatever it is, these things start to kind of bubble up and kind of point you in a direction. So I would ask you to think through your life and to listen. What do you notice about your life? What brings you joy? What breaks your heart? What do you find yourself talking about all the time? And I would say, listen to the Holy Spirit as He guides you. I couldn't have identified exactly what these things were, but they were bubbling up all along the way. And I would say, tell other people your story and have them listen with you. There's something so amazing about community in that way. The second thing that I would say about my road and calling and the roads of my friends is that more often than not, it is a winding road. And I thought it had to be a straight shot, or else I was somehow failing. And everyone that I know, for them, it has been a winding road. After my time in DC, these things are still bubbling up, and I realized law school is the way for me to figure this out. This is the way that I could go and serve these communities that I am somehow drawn to. So it was awesome. I left DC, I went to Pepperdine, got there, so cool, until the first day. And I learned that law school was very challenging for my personality, my giftings. It was the tool that I needed to get to the next stage. It was rough, I'll be honest. I was overwhelmed. I am not a linear thinker, and I was in a sea of very focused, linear, amazing thinkers. I'm not a legacy kid. I didn't know lawyers. I don't have lawyers in my family. And I felt like I was surrounded by people who sort of knew the culture and knew what it was supposed to look like to become a lawyer. And then, maybe you know that law school is based on one test per semester. And the grades, is kind of the common knowledge, is that the first semester grades are going to dictate where you land forever. And I got those grades, and they were not impressive. And I'm not bragging to say this. I think that you're in a sea of really intelligent people. I was not used to being impressive in some way. I was never the top of my class, but I always did pretty well. And these grades were really disappointing. And so I remember calling one of my mentors and telling her, it took a lot of guts for me to even, admit that I was not good at law school. And so her response was very shocking to me. She said, "Praise God." And I was like, "I think you're not my mentor anymore." She said, "You will never think, wherever your life goes, you will never think that you did it on your own." Okay, you can be my mentor. That's true. Getting through that and realizing that it really was, I am a vessel. I am just trying to find my way of how I will love God and others, and it is really up to Him about how this goes. The second semester, thankfully, second semester you can start to do some hands-on experiential stuff. And so I was asked to come and join a group of students who were starting kind of a grassroots legal aid clinic down at the Union Rescue Mission. The weird thing about this for me is that as I was looking for underserved, underrepresented communities that I might be involved in, those who were experiencing homelessness had never crossed my mind. Never. I was exposed to people who were homeless as a child at my little inner city church, and quite frankly, they totally scared me. I remember being in Page and being invited to a homelessness ministry that someone at Westmont had started, and I think my response is, I don't do homeless. You should be careful what you say. And so I just did not have a pull to this particular community. But I did have a need, and I was very hungry for community itself, and so going with those particular students who I admired meant something to me, and so I went ahead and went. And what we do is we'd go down to the Union Rescue Mission, drive an hour out of Malibu, which was just good for me to get out of the bubble anyway. So go down to LA, meet with a few clients with our professor, and then come back, research, and go back a few weeks later with hopefully an answer. And let me tell you that when I went to the Union Rescue Mission, it's probably one of the most profound experiences of my life. I felt completely at home, which is very strange. That's a strange thing to feel at a homeless shelter, right? And I'm sitting there and I'm working with my professor and I'm doing this and I'm realizing all the things that drive up my insecurities as a law student make me a pretty dang good lawyer. I can connect with this client. I can think on my feet. I love problem solving. All the things that sort of get lost in a more doctrinal and stiff environment, everything about me came to life in that setting. And I was completely hooked. And so for the next years, I worked in that clinic and continued to kind of develop and figure out, and I just could not believe that the place where my heart had come to life was in this shelter. Another mentor, as I was trying to process, I had also had a job offer from a lovely firm full of really wonderful people doing meaningful work, but that had nothing to do with people that I wanted to serve. And another mentor told me, if you are drawn to this work, if you are drawn to the underserved, you have got to do it because people are not lining up for this. And so with that in my mind, I turned down a firm offer, which they give you in the middle of law school that will take place when you're out. So it's complete stability. And so I said, I really admire you guys, but I'm not going to do that. I'm going to wait for this thing that I don't know what it is, right? Which was totally scary. I graduated in 2001, which we called it a recession until we knew about 2008. So there were very few public interest jobs. So I went on lots of interviews, and I got lots of notes that said, you're great, we'll hire you when we have money. We don't know when that is. So a lot of time went by without any kind of work. I ended up, this is awesome, I ended up working at a temp agency, not even a legal temp agency, a temp agency. And one of the jobs that I recall, and this was right about when I got my bar results, so you feel so great when you pass the bar. Like, it's such an accomplishment. You're so happy to have that all behind you. And then I went to work as the assistant to a receptionist. I did not know that this was a position. And suffice it to say, it is not on your list of goals when you spend all that money to go to law school. Another lovely part of this season was I got to move home. I'd been out of my house for, 7, 8 years, and I got to go home. And I'm the oldest of 5 kids, so my name was on a chore chart. So I was feeling really great about myself in 2001. And it was this moment of like, do you tell people you've passed the bar? Does it help your pride in any way, or is it just worse? Like, just keep quiet. The next job that came along was better, I guess, but not great. It was a contract position with a family law attorney. Ended up being just a crummy situation, and I ended up being just work that just repulsed me because I was helping rich people fight over things in divorce, and all I wanted to do was be on Skid Row, right? Like, so it was just so aggravating. And I can remember in that season crying out to God, and I was very mad because I was like, I told you I would do the hard thing. I will go to Skid Row. Like, seriously, people don't say this. Come on, I said I would do this, and you are not letting me. And what I heard him say is, go do it. And what had not occurred to me at that point is that if I am driven to love the world in a certain way, money is not the reason to not do it, right? So what I did is I volunteered at the Skid Row clinic. I took 1 case a month, so just a small amount, but it fed that part of me that had a sense that I was supposed to be doing something bigger, and somehow made that other part of my job, which was still miserable, a little less so. And I think also it kind of got me moving in the right direction. Later, I would be sitting in an interview for my present position and listen to the interviewers go through these things that I had done, all things I had grumbled through, all things that I thought had no vision or purpose, all things that felt very dead end, and they could see all these different ways that those things had prepared me for my current job. And I just almost laughed out loud because I was like, sorry, God, I got it, okay. I see that you were working. In order to prepare for today, I wanted to make sure I wasn't just bringing my own story, and so I reached out to about 20 alums that I graduated with who are all doing really remarkable work throughout the world, and I asked them a series of questions, and part of those questions I'm going to use for the workshop tomorrow. And let me just say about them, they are so excited for you. They are 20 years out. They know that your journey is going to be weird and windy and crazy, but they believe that you're going to do some really incredible things, and they're super excited to encourage you. So everyone just responded immediately. They're so excited. These friends are directing nonprofits. They're working towards sustainability overseas. They're providing medical and mental health care. They're running foundations. They're lawyers and entrepreneurs and teachers, and they're all just doing such meaningful work. Man, we'll fly. What they would all say is that this is not a straight shot kind of thing. This is a winding road that meanders and that goes to dead ends, and you have to restart and all sorts of things. But I think they would all say that there are gifts in that winding road, and I would definitely say that there have been hidden gifts in this winding road. Like I mentioned before, I am fully aware that where I have landed has very little to do with me. It is only by God's grace that I am doing the work that I'm doing. I will never, ever be rude to an administrative assistant, right? And I'm training young lawyers, and they will never, ever be rude to an administrative assistant. There was something really formative about that experience. I've learned that if something is stirring in me, it doesn't matter if I can find a formalized way to express it, I need to express it. And I've come to learn that no step, not one of them, is wasted. And they always feed into the next thing. They always provide light for the next step. And they always allow us to circle back to the one who's called us, which is really significant. I am so moved by the idea of abiding in Christ, of remaining close to the vine so that I can do good work. And so this process, this winding, keeps bringing us asking what it is that God would want us to do and how he wants us to love his world. So, back to the journal. I know you're all dying to know how it worked out. I did get a date, so that's good. And 10 years after I wrote that, I met and married my husband, Brent. And we have 4 kids who are 2, 5, 8, and 10. So our life is insane. And lovely and full and awesome. And while I have found my way to my work, now I find that the winding road is about how to blend these equally important callings in my life, to be a spouse and a mother and to work with my students and with my clients on Skid Row. And so all of these truths, they all continue to kind of meander and wind. There is no right way to be a working mom. There's a million great ways to do it, and I'm going to try to figure that out, but I'm going to keep coming back to the one who calls me and asking for wisdom. I'm going to rely on my community, and I'm going to listen. The third observation I want to share with you has really come from being a parent. It gives you kind of a new lens on what God is like, because you figure, if I'm like this just this much, how much more could this good God be? And so I want to tell you about Labor Day weekend. So my third son has just turned 5, and he's been dying to learn to ride his bike. I feel really, as an English major, I hate that I am using the cliche bike analogy. I apologize, but it just works. So it's kind of like all things are like bikes, right? And so I could have sent him out with a list of thorough instructions about how to ride a bike. And honestly, he's pretty kinetic. He would have figured it out. I could have also started out by giving him a little lecture about how important it was for him to learn that bike learn how to ride that bike on that particular day in order to please me. I could have set all of these expectations up. And he probably, again, would have done it. But instead, that morning is now one of my favorite mornings of near misses and actual, hits of walls and the wind flying through his hair and his confidence growing and trying to do skid marks before he even knows how to ride. I mean, it was a totally crazy morning, and I probably ran an entire mile between my house and the corner, just back and forth, with me wildly running and so excited with him. And my hands are flailing, and I'm holding on, and then I'm letting go, and then I better hold on again. And he's so excited, and he's like, we're doing it. And that is, if I could leave you with a picture. As you are trying to figure out what you will do with your life, may I just suggest that it is not an archery tournament. It is not that you pull back that bow and you better hit that bullseye or else you will disappoint everyone. Instead, could you just see the God who loves you so much running alongside you and trying to help you find the very things that he's embedded in you, the gifts that he has bestowed upon you, so that you might serve and love and care for the world that he so loves. He is inviting each of us to join him in this redemptive process. I am so moved by the idea that we are invited. And then the thought that he is cheering you along, that there are few things that you can do wrong in this if you will just start. And it might look really different from season to season. It has looked different for me and my friends. Sometimes God's priorities and your passions and the way to make money all line up beautifully, and that is awesome. And it does not happen all the time. Maybe you'll be like my husband, where he works to provide for our family and contribute in that way, but he is a storyteller and an artist, and we do not want that flame to be burned out. And so what he does is he goes to work 2 hours early, and he draws comic books before he goes to work. And we carve out that time. That is sacred time in our family. Maybe you'll go to grad school and you'll be serving at a restaurant and you'll be like, oh my goodness, where is this leading? And maybe there are people in that setting to love in a new way. Maybe you'll have these first jobs that we all did where we serve way too much coffee. Like, I don't understand how that's part of the job, but whatever. You're just trying to be around the people who are doing the work that you'd like to be a part of. So whatever it is in all of these seasons, I am convinced that there is always a way to love God and others in it. And so I encourage you, would you listen to what is stirring in you? Would you listen to your lives? Would you listen to what people see and hear in you? Would you look for the gifts of this winding road? I promise you that they're there. Sometimes they're really easier to see in 2020. But again, with the community, could you help call out the gifts of the winding road? And would you be committed to finding that unique brand that you're going to put on loving others and loving God, the things that are just embedded in you? And if you will do these things, I'm convinced, and my friends are convinced, that you will find a story that is so worth telling. Would you pray with me? God, you are so good, and we are so grateful to be invited into the work that you're doing in this world. We acknowledge that this conversation is a privilege to even be having, and that so many around the world don't get the time, the space, the luxury of even asking these questions. And so, God, we want to steward them well. We want to do what you've called us to do. We want to, more than anything, just walk alongside you and abide in you. Would you guide us, Lord, and would you sustain us in your name? Amen. You're dismissed.